Happy Monday, folks. We got a lot to cover in today's video. We're going to go over the latest Detroit Lions news, and Roger Goodell and the Detroit Lions seem to be on the same page in regards to a rule proposal. We're going to talk about that because if it does pass, it would be quite different going forward. We're going to get into the pre-draft visits. Some names popped up. We must keep an eye on those names because Brad Holmes, he does draft from those lists. Could we get some joint practices? Dan Campbell speaks. And A to Z Sports dropped a mock draft that I do think is realistic with trades, so we're going to go through that one for sure. But before we get into today's video, make sure you hit that like button. Let's get to 300 likes in this video. With your help, it can happen. Let's go ahead and start out with Roger Goodell and the Detroit Lions. Per multiple sources, it became clear during last week's league meeting that Roger Goodell wants to eliminate the guaranteed home game for teams that win their divisions. Goodell's preference became clear during the meeting regarding the proposal that was made by the Lions. One source in the room for the session said Goodell became visibly irritated at the resistance to the measure. Florio continued. Now, this is the idea that if you have a better record, you would have a home game, i.e. what happened last year with the Minnesota Vikings. They had to travel to play their playoff game. This new rule change would make it so they would have the home playoff game. Now, I actually like this rule change. About 15, 20 years ago, Seattle Seahawks, they hosted a divisional game, and they had a losing record, and they hosted a winner. And I think that if a team like the Minnesota Vikings or any other team that puts up a lot of wins, they had 14 wins, they should be able to host a playoff game instead of going to somewhere else. And when you think about rivalries right now, in my opinion, yes, there's always in-division rival, right? You got Chicago Bears, you got the Green Bay Packers, you got the Minnesota Vikings, but this is 2025. There's other rivalries out there, so if you're concerned about that, I think the Lions got a rivalry with the Rams now. I think it's a big rivalry, right? I think this is something that's going to be going for a little bit, the big trade with the Stafford. I think the Dallas Cowboys game is a rivalry, right? Ever since the Taylor Decker and the Dan Skipper, it's been something to behold. So I actually like this idea if this rule is changed. And think, if the Lions do have a better record this year or years going down forward, and do you want them to travel against a weaker opponent? I think that this rule change is good. But give me your thoughts in the comments right now. Let's continue on and talk about Dan Campbell wants to have some joint practices. Says, I'm not going to say it because it seems like every year I've done that, it's been this explosion. Like, hey, I wish you wouldn't have told us before you did that, Campbell. We haven't told our media, Campbell expressed. I was like, all right, so yeah, we've got something that works. We'll see what happens. I love joint practices. Now, we don't know what it would be, what teams they would face. We already know the preseason schedule, but it's only going to be two teams that they'd be doing it against. Why is it a good thing? We get to see our team go against another team. In training camp, you're always beating each other up, and it would be nice to see them doing that against another squad, as well as it's a great way to kind of see how our new offense with our new offensive coordinator and new defensive coordinator works. And I think going against competition in the NFL is great. What does it do for the preseason game? Yeah, it makes it a little bit worse. Who cares? It's preseason. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. So I'm always in favor of joint practices. Plus, if you're a fan, you can see other team as well. You don't just see the Detroit Lions when you go to training camp, and vice versa. Same with other fan bases if the Lions travel. So I'm always down for things of that nature. Now, let's get into the 30 visits. The 30 visits are extremely important to go over. Why is that? Because the Detroit Lions don't BS you. They draft from the 30 visits. It's not smoke. Here are the players right now that has visited the Detroit Lions, and they're all in play with the Lions selections and picks. Not all at 28, obviously, but throughout their draft. Gray Zabel, North Dakota State, visited the Detroit Lions. I've been telling you, folks, him and Booker are a legit option at 28. The Lions like him. They want to build that offensive line. Shermer Stewart, Texas A&M edge. Yes, he's had multiple contact with the Detroit Lions, and he would be an option. I think this would be interesting. I don't know if it actually occurs, but it is an option. Lan Larison, the running back, I had him in a mock draft. That would be a late-round draft pick. It's possible if they wanted to go that route, but he has visited the Lions. Josiah Stewart, This guy probably will be a Detroit Lion. Why is that? Not only has he visited the Lions, they have had a virtual contact with him. They visited him in the NFL Draft Combine and a 30 visit. Look at Josiah Stewart in round 3 for the Detroit Lions. He is a hot name, and he very well could be a Detroit Lion. Chaz Chambliss from Georgia, linebacker, and Ruben Hippolyte of Maryland. They've had a lot of linebackers come visit the Detroit Lions. A ton. And it doesn't mean that they're going to take a linebacker early. I do not believe that is going to be the case. But a player in the mid to late rounds, 100% for development. Our defensive coordinator is a former linebacker. And we did have some injuries to Malcolm Rodriguez, even though we had a great update that he potentially could be back. But there's nothing wrong with having competitions. Let's get into the virtual visits, because there's some interesting names out there as well for the Lions. It has Edge Fadi Diggs, Edge Josiah Stewart. We just talked about him. The local pro days, you have Penny Boone, Blake Daniels. A lot of these guys could be undrafted free agents, the local ones. But you're seeing edge and tight end, right? I've been telling you folks that they're going to take a tight end probably at some point in the draft, but more predominantly in the end of the draft. Continue on here. Again, offensive line, edge, defensive tackle. I don't expect the Lions to draft a kicker there. That's just a local thing. But you're seeing what the Lions are trying to get here. You're seeing it. You're seeing the trend. Edge, tight end, offensive line, defensive tackle, linebacker, and wide receiver. What are our own needs? Pretty much all of that. That's all our needs. So they're all right there getting it done. So I want you guys to like the video really quick. Smash that like, but let's get to 300 likes in this video. Let's get to A to Z's mock draft, because it starts off with a bang. With the 11th pick, the Detroit Lions decided to make a trade. So they go from 28 to 11. This was the trade that was given. The 49ers received the 28th pick, the 102nd pick, and a first-round pick next year. Big trade. Moving all the way up to 11. Who do they select? They select a killer player here, Mykel Williams. Pass rusher, 6'5", 265, junior edge. He had 15 solo tackles, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 0 interceptions. His ceiling is extremely high, and if you were to pair him up with Aiden Hutchinson, that would be really nice. I think he can bring the Lions some fierce pass rush, something that we haven't seen in a long time. This would make a lot of people happy in Detroit. We've been waiting for edge. They didn't go do a whole lot in free agency. This would make us smile on our face. It ain't over. The Detroit Lions make another trade, but they trade backwards. The Bills trade up for the 60th pick. The Lions move to the 62nd, and they get 173. Again, this is very possible, moving back a couple to pick up some players. That seems like a Brad Holmes type of move. We've done it every year in the draft. Who do they select? Well, they're going to go ahead and go offensive line, Josh Connolly. 6'4", 315, Oregon offensive line junior. Yes, yes, and yes. This does feel like a Detroit Lions draft so far right now. You're getting edge and offensive line, and I do think with the first 2 picks, it will probably go that way. You could flip the position if you wanted to, but I do expect edge and offensive line to be high in the Detroit Lions wanting and need list. That's what they got there. So far, so good for this draft. Now, with the next pick, I've talked about this player endlessly. With the 130th pick, and I'm going to have him in my final mock draft probably, it's going to be Pat Bryant, wide receiver, Illinois. I've had him in a couple mock drafts. I do think the Lions are targeting him. They've had contact with him. He's exactly what the Lions are looking for at wide receiver. I really don't need to consistently go over his work that he has done, but he's produced at a nice level in college, and I think with his body and size, he could be a great replacement for Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick's on a 1-year deal. The Lions, Brad Holmes talked about, they want to get wide receiver and get young there. This makes a lot of sense, just a lot of sense. So far, I want you to grade the mock draft that A to Z Sports did here. A, B, C, D, or F. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get into the Next, 4 selections for the Detroit Lions here, and they're going Ahmad Hassan. I love this. You're getting a pass rusher here. This is doubling up on a bigger pass rusher, by the way. He had 9 sacks in college. Bigger guy. This would be more of a developmental and a rotational player. This would be, you could see him on the interior as well of the defensive line. He's got the size to get it done. This would be a great selection. I would be pretty happy with that one. Jackson Hayes, tight end out of Georgia Tech. I had him in my mock draft as well. Later in the draft, this would be a end of the mock draft or end of the draft. He could be a guy to go against to see if he can make it to the roster for maybe tight end 3 against Shane Zylstra and the other guys that are on the roster. This is not a replacement or anything of Sam Laporta. This is probably a tight end 3. Sean Dolak, linebacker. A developmental linebacker right there that they can see if he can even attempt to make the roster. But we've been seeing throughout the pre-draft visits that the Lions are very interested. And so I have no problem that the Lions go in that route. And they're going Bru McCoy, wide receiver here. Now, this one is intriguing if you ask me because we already drafted a wide receiver, and he's a big body. Bru McCoy's a big body as well at 6'3", 230. He had 39 receptions, 472 yards, 2 touchdowns that average 12.1. It'd be odd for them to go 2 wide receivers here, but it's possible. It is possible. Why is it possible? Because maybe they don't like the end of the depth of the Lions receivers. Now, I don't think they go double up on wide receiver, but if they took one in the 7th round, I'm not going to cry about that. Again, grade this mock draft. A, B, C, D, or F. I want to know your guys' thoughts on this one. Make sure you hit that notification bell, subscribe to the channel. With that said, folks, adios.